Why was everyone else's name being called, but not hers? The Pacific fog had draped itself over Naval Station San Diego like a heavy curtain, dulling sound, muting color, turning the entire base into a stage where every detail felt deliberate. Seaman recruit Maya Chen stood in the fourth row of formation, her dress blues pressed so sharply they looked carved into her skin. Hands locked behind her back, chin high, posture flawless. On the surface, she was another junior sailor in a sea of faces. But inside, something was already unraveling. It was 700 hours, the annual recognition ceremony. Rows of palm trees shifted with the coastal wind as the base came alive, colors hoisted, ships moored in the harbor, aircraft taxiing on the runway beyond the field. The Navy was wide awake, alive with purpose. And yet, she was frozen in place, waiting for her name. Commander Sarah Mitchell's voice carried across the formation. Calm, commanding. She began reading the roll of honors, working her way through ranks with precision. Senior petty officers, chiefs, awards, commendations, advancements. The rhythm was steady, predictable, almost ceremonial in its inevitability. But Maya knew her name should have come already. Her pay grade, E1, Seaman Recruit, made her one of the most junior personnel here. Protocol said her category would be called early, and yet the announcer moved right past it, right past her, as if she didn't exist. She stood rigid, muscles locked, breath shallow. Her palms grew damp inside her white gloves. The sailor next to her, Rodriguez, leaned ever so slightly and whispered, "Why haven't they called you yet?" She didn't answer. She couldn't. Her jaw remained tight, eyes fixed forward. Military bearing demanded silence, but inside the whisper cut deep. She had asked herself the same question a dozen times already. Her record was spotless, perfect fitness scores, highest marks in technical training, volunteer work at the base food bank. She wasn't just another recruit. She had stood out. And yet here, in front of hundreds of sailors, officers, and staff, she was invisible. The announcer moved through the E2S, then the E3s, still nothing. Maya felt heat crawl up her neck, spreading across her face. She could sense whispers forming like smoke behind her, the kind of gossip that spread through ranks faster than any official announcement ever could. She caught fragments. That's the girl who aced the combat systems exam. Didn't she run the charity drive? Why isn't her name called? Her stomach twisted. This wasn't just an oversight anymore. This was humiliation. She thought briefly about stepping out, quietly excusing herself, finding her division officer and asking to be dismissed. But no, moving without orders would be worse. Protocol was everything. Breaking formation wasn't just a mistake, it was career suicide. So she stood there, burning in silence, every second carving itself into memory. Up near the podium, Master Chief Williams shifted uncomfortably. His chest full of ribbons glinted in the morning sun, his weathered face unreadable. But his eyes kept flicking toward her, watching, measuring, like he knew something. And then the pause. Commander Mitchell faltered. She exchanged words with the Master Chief. Their heads bent over a clipboard, their voices hushed but urgent. Williams gestured once toward the rows, toward her. Maya's heart pounded so hard she thought it might echo. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mitchell's voice finally carried again, calm but taut. "We will take a brief pause to verify our roster. Please remain at attention." The air changed. The pause wasn't just about paperwork. Everyone in formation knew it. The silence carried weight, and every sailor in the rows felt it pressed down like the marine fog itself. Maya swallowed hard, her throat dry. She was the pause. She was the administrative issue. Rodriguez murmured beside her, "Maybe you should talk to someone." Her lips barely moved. "And say what? That I don't know why I'm here." Before he could answer, a black sedan rolled into the restricted area near the platform. Its doors opened. Two figures stepped out, their movements crisp, deliberate, commanding. The atmosphere shifted instantly. The entire formation seemed to stiffen, as though a silent current had jolted through every spine. Commander Mitchell froze for a second, then snapped herself back to composure and hurried forward to greet the arrivals. Master Chief Williams' posture straightened even further, like gravity itself had intensified. Maya couldn't see the newcomers clearly, but she felt the ripple of presence spreading outward. Rank, authority, power. The camera crew from public affairs abandoned their casual stance, lenses shifting to capture the unexpected scene. The whispers died. Now there was only silence, broken by the distant rhythm of an approaching helicopter. Maya's pulse raced. This wasn't on the program. None of it was. She thought of the letter again, the one that had arrived 3 days earlier. Simple, direct, report to the ceremony, dress blues, no explanation, no context, no details. She had shown it to her division officer. Even he had been puzzled. Now she knew why. The helicopter descended onto the landing pad, blades chopping the air. Its insignia wasn't local command. It belonged higher, much higher. Maya's breath caught. Through the shifting air and dust, she saw them, 2 admirals. Gold braid, authority carved into every detail of their uniforms. And suddenly, the formation wasn't just a recognition ceremony anymore. It was a stage, and somehow she was at the center of it. Her knees felt unsteady, her chest tight. Her grandfather's stories flickered in her memory, tales she had dismissed as exaggerations. Stories of ceremonies interrupted by men who worked in shadows, by orders that never appeared on paper. She had smiled at them once, thinking them harmless fabrications of an old man. But standing here now, forgotten by the roll call yet illuminated by attention she hadn't asked for, she wondered. Had those stories been warnings? Master Chief Williams caught her eye again, and this time he nodded, a slow, deliberate nod, a signal. Her throat tightened. The helicopter's blades slowed, the admirals walked forward, the crowd stiffened. And then the first voice cut the silence, strong, clear, commanding. "Good morning. I am Admiral Robert Harrison, Chief of Naval Personnel. I apologize for the interruption to your ceremony, but there is a matter of significant importance that requires immediate attention." The fog had lifted now. The sun poured across the grounds. Every sailor stood frozen, breath held, eyes fixed on the stage. And Maya Chen, forgotten just moments ago, realized she was no longer invisible. She was the reason the ceremony had stopped. But why? Why was the Admiral looking directly into her row? The ceremony field had gone unnaturally still. Rows of sailors, 1,000 strong, locked at attention yet straining to follow every movement at the podium. For them, the interruption was strange, unplanned. For Maya, it was suffocating. Her chest felt tight against her uniform. She couldn't steady her breathing, not fully, not when she could feel the weight of those 2 flag officers. Admirals didn't just appear at base recognition ceremonies. They weren't supposed to. The highest rank most recruits ever saw stood at the command of their ship or maybe the regional base. But this was Washington-level gravity. She swallowed hard, her throat dry. Admiral Harrison stood tall, silver hair catching the light, his voice resonant enough that it carried without a microphone. Today's ceremony was planned to recognize exemplary service across all pay grades of our Navy family, he said. However, there is one omission. The pause stretched, silent, deliberate. Maya's heart hammered against her ribs. She felt as though every sound, the rustling of fabric, the distant call of gulls over the harbor, had sharpened. Every nerve inside her was tuned only to him. Due to recently modified classification protocols, the Admiral continued, one name was withheld from the official roster. Whispers rippled like a current through the formation. Classification. That word struck like a jolt of electricity. She had heard it before, of course, during training, classified files, classified briefings, but never in a context that might apply to her. She was 8 months into her service. She had barely found her footing as a sailor. Classification wasn't her world. But now, Admiral Harrison glanced at the document in his hand, then looked out again. His eyes swept across the field, searching, settling. Her chest clenched. "Seaman Recruit Maya Chen," he called, voice strong and unmistakable. "Step forward." The air cracked open. 1,000 eyes turned all at once. Some wide, some skeptical, some envious, but all fixed on her. Her knees felt weak. Her feet seemed glued to the ground. She had been trained for formation, for precision, for ceremony. But she had never been trained for this, to be singled out by an admiral, to step forward when her name hadn't been on any program, to stand exposed before ranks of peers and commanders. Rodriguez, beside her, whispered out of the corner of his mouth, "Go." She took her first step. The sound of her shoe against the concrete cut through the silence like a metronome. Every movement felt magnified, as if the entire base was watching her cross the distance. She wove between rows, posture rigid, hands steady only because she forced them to be. Gasps, murmurs. She heard them but didn't let her eyes waver. She couldn't. Her heart pounded faster with every step toward the platform. The fog was gone now, the sun sharp, spotlighting her. She remembered her grandfather's words once when she was a child. Sometimes the quiet moments matter more than the loud ones. Watch who notices silence. Now silence was all there was. She reached the platform, saluted, her hand as sharp as she could make it despite the tremor running through her veins. Admiral Harrison returned the salute, his expression unreadable, then stepped aside. The second admiral moved forward. She caught the name tape on his chest, Chin. Her breath caught, Chen, Chin. The coincidence tugged at her like an invisible thread. The man's eyes were sharper than steel, narrowing as they studied her face. He leaned just enough for his words to carry only to her and those nearest the podium. "Seaman Recruit," he said quietly, "do you recognize this name?" Her response was automatic, almost mechanical. "No, sir." But inside, something wavered. Admiral Chin produced a folded, yellow document from his uniform jacket. Its edges frayed, its seals official, its weight undeniable. He unfolded it slowly, deliberately. "8 months ago, when you enlisted," he said, his voice low but steady, "you reported no family military service, no ties to the armed forces." "Yes, sir," Maya replied. "My family immigrated from Taiwan when I was 5. No prior U.S. service." The two admirals exchanged a look, brief, heavy. Then Admiral Chin placed the document into her hands. The paper felt older than she was. Its ink faded, its authority intact. "You are the granddaughter of Commander Lu Wei-ming," he said. "Republic of China Navy, later naturalized as David Chen. His service record was sealed under U.S. protocols for over 3 decades. Maya froze. Her grandfather, the man who taught her chess, who cooked noodles for her when her parents worked late, who told her bedtime stories of oceans and ships, always with a hint of something withheld. He had never spoken of a military career. Never. The ground felt like it shifted beneath her. "His record was declassified last month," Admiral Chin continued. "It revealed intelligence contributions to the U.S. Pacific Fleet, work that prevented conflicts, work that saved lives, work that could not be recognized publicly until now." The crowd was silent, the silence of revelation. Maya's pulse roared in her ears. She tried to picture her grandfather in uniform, in command, tried to reconcile the quiet man she had known with the weight of what she was hearing. Her throat tightened, her eyes stung. And then Admiral Harrison's voice cut through, this time amplified across the field. "Seaman Recruit Chen," he announced. "Step fully forward. The recognition withheld is not yours alone but your family's. Today, you will accept what was earned in shadows decades ago." Maya's hands trembled as she held the document. She forced her chin high, but inside she felt small, exposed. And yet beneath the shock, a spark flickered. Not forgotten, not overlooked, chosen. She didn't understand it, not yet, but she could feel it, the tide pulling her toward something she couldn't name. She stood before the Admirals, the formation behind her silent, the weight of history pressing down like the California sun. And in that moment, the ceremony was no longer about commendations, ranks, or recognition. It was about her, and the legacy she hadn't even known she carried. What did they mean, her grandfather a commander? Maya stood stiff at the platform, the document heavy in her hands, paper that looked older than her service record, older than her memory of him. Her grandfather had been a quiet man, a translator, a chess teacher, a man who walked her home from school and bought her steamed buns from a corner bakery. Never once had he spoken of classified intelligence work, of military service, of the kind of life that would require silence for 35 years. Her mouth was dry, her pulse unsteady. The two admirals loomed beside her, their presence commanding, but it was the words echoing in her head that pinned her in place. Commander Lu Wei-Ming, Republic of China Navy, intelligence contributions. Her chest tightened, this can't be right. But it was written in ink older than her career, sealed with authority that no one in the formation could question. Admiral Harrison's voice boomed across the grounds, amplified now through the speakers. We are here to acknowledge service that remained unspoken. Commander David Chen, born Lu Wei-Ming, rendered distinguished contributions to the United States Navy during a critical period of Pacific history. His efforts prevented confrontations that could have cost lives and escalated conflict. Gasps rippled softly through the ranks. Maya's mind drifted, uninvited, unstoppable, to nights when she was small, sitting at a wooden table with her grandfather. He had pushed a chess piece forward and said, "Sometimes winning isn't the point, Maya. Sometimes it's stopping the other side from moving at all." She had thought it was just a lesson about patience, about strategy. But now the words sounded heavier, as if they'd been rehearsed from experience. Her fingers trembled as Admiral Chin stepped forward with a small velvet case in his hand. He opened it slowly, deliberately, revealing a medal that gleamed in the morning sun. Bronze and blue, etched with meaning she barely understood. "The Navy Commendation Medal," Admiral Chin said, his voice steadier than hers could ever be. "Posthumously awarded to Commander Chen for service in joint operations between the Republic of China Navy and the United States Pacific Fleet. His intelligence reports provided critical insight into adversary submarine deployments and missile capabilities. Without his work, several naval encounters in the South China Sea would have ended in blood." The medal caught the light, dazzling against the dark cloth. Maya's throat closed. Her hands felt clumsy as she reached for the case, as though touching it would rewrite her childhood. The quiet man who had shown her how to solve puzzles, who had smiled at her school drawings, who had seemed so ordinary, he had been extraordinary in silence. Her vision blurred at the edges, but she didn't let it show. She took the case, snapped it closed with trembling fingers, and held it tight against her chest. The formation behind her was utterly silent, rows upon rows of uniforms, each sailor straining to absorb this moment. It wasn't just a medal presentation. It was a secret pulled into daylight, a secret that had skipped a generation and landed squarely on her shoulders. Admiral Harrison continued, his voice rich with authority but softened by something else. Respect, perhaps, or pity. Commander Chen's service record was classified for 35 years. Only now, upon review triggered by your enlistment, could it be released. His devotion to duty, his courage in silence deserve recognition. And so today, Seaman Recruit Chen, you accept this honor not for yourself, but for the man who stood before you and for the legacy he left behind. Legacy, the word struck hard. Maya blinked, forcing her eyes to stay dry. She remembered how her grandfather had avoided questions about his youth, how he had deflected, changed the subject, wrapped his answers in half-truths that she had been too young to notice. She had assumed it was simply the silence of age, or the reluctance of an immigrant to dredge up the past. But maybe it hadn't been reluctance. Maybe it had been duty. Her grip on the metal case tightened. She wondered if her mother knew, if her father knew, if anyone in her family had ever suspected that their father, their husband, had once lived a life so hidden it could only be revealed decades later. Admiral Chin leaned closer, his voice dropping so only she could hear. Your grandfather was more than an asset. He was an officer. He recruited others, protected them, smuggled them out of danger under false papers. He saved lives not with weapons but with information. Her breath hitched. 17. That was the number he spoke. 17 officers extracted from hostile waters, pulled from under surveillance, given new names, new lives, new homes. 17 people whose existence in America could be traced back to her grandfather's work. Her knees felt weak. The stage beneath her feet felt unsteady, as though the truth itself was tilting her world. She looked down at the metal case again. It wasn't just bronze and ribbon. It was proof. Proof that he had carried something monumental and never said a word. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. Why me? The Admiral's eyes softened, but his tone remained grave. Because service doesn't vanish with one generation. Sometimes it waits. Maya swallowed, her mind racing. She thought of her training scores, her aptitude in communications, her language background. Had all of it been weighed against his? Was she standing here not only as his granddaughter but as his replacement? She wanted to ask more. She wanted to demand answers, but she couldn't. Not here. Not with 1,000 sailors holding their breath, waiting for her next move. She forced her chin up, her eyes forward. She saluted again, crisp despite the tremor in her chest, and as Admiral Harrison returned it, the applause broke at last. The sound roared through the ceremony grounds, rolling over her like a tide. But Maya didn't feel triumphant. She didn't feel proud. She felt the opposite, small, dwarfed by a history she hadn't asked to inherit. And somewhere beneath the applause, beneath the formal recognition, beneath the polished words of commanders and admirals, she sensed something else. This wasn't the end of the revelation. It was only the beginning. How could a medal weigh so much? Maya held it against her chest like a fragile relic, yet it felt heavier than her uniform, heavier than the ribbons and awards pinned across the entire formation. She couldn't hear the applause anymore, not really. It was a roar at the edges of her senses, blurred by the pulse in her ears. She wanted to step back, to fade into the ranks again, to let the ceremony roll on as if nothing had happened. But she was stuck in the spotlight, frozen in the truth of a history she hadn't lived but now carried. Her grandfather, Commander Lu Wei-Ming. She remembered him through fragments, his soft laugh when she toppled chess pieces with clumsy hands, the way he lingered at the window some evenings, staring at nothing, lost in thoughts she had never been old enough to read. How he'd once said, "The hardest battles are the ones no one ever sees." At 12 years old, she hadn't understood. Now, standing before admirals and sailors, she wondered if he'd been preparing her even then. The applause faded, and silence reclaimed the grounds. Commander Mitchell stepped aside at the podium, her eyes betraying curiosity she couldn't voice. Even she didn't know why this had happened, why the ceremony had been hijacked by admirals and classified files. Admiral Harrison raised his hand, steadying the restless energy of the formation. His voice dropped lower now, no longer ceremonial but personal, intimate. "There is more to tell," he said. "What you have seen today is only part of the story." The crowd stiffened again. Maya's breath caught. Admiral Chin stepped closer, his expression unreadable, his gaze fixed squarely on her. "Your grandfather's file was sealed not only because of his service," he said, each word deliberate, "but because of the nature of his assignments. He was not simply passing information. He was orchestrating networks, moving pieces across a board larger than most of us will ever see. A chill ran through her. He opened another folder, thinner, newer, its papers pristine against the weathered document she already held. He spoke softly, almost conversationally, but the microphone picked up every syllable. Your grandfather recruited and safeguarded 17 officers who would otherwise have vanished. He built bridges between our fleets in a time when one wrong move could have sparked a war, and he did it with a skill set we rarely see. Maya's throat tightened. Her eyes flicked toward the rows of sailors. They were motionless, absorbing every word. Some looked impressed, some confused. Some, she noticed, skeptical, as though they wondered why a raw recruit was standing where seasoned officers normally would. Admiral Harrison's voice cut through her spiral. Seaman Recruit Chen, your enlistment triggered the reopening of these files. When we examined your record, your aptitude, your training scores, your language skills, we saw parallels. Parallels. The word landed like a stone in her stomach. She wanted to protest. She was nobody. She had barely learned to stand inspection without her heart hammering. She had pulled night duty in the comms shack, sorted cables, memorized frequencies, studied until her eyes burned. That was all. She wasn't extraordinary. Her grandfather had been. But Harrison wasn't finished. You have already been flagged by departments that rarely pay attention to recruits. Intelligence offices, cryptology divisions, psychological evaluators. They all noted the same pattern: determination under pressure, adaptability, languages. The exact same traits we documented when your grandfather was first approached. Maya's breath stuttered. Approached, recruited, words that hinted at something far deeper than medals and ceremonies. The metal case felt like an anchor in her hands. She gripped it tighter, her knuckles whitening, as though holding on might keep her from being swept away by the tide of revelation crashing over her. Her mind flicked back uninvited to a night years earlier. She was maybe 10. Her grandfather had been sitting at the table, papers spread out in front of him. She had leaned over his shoulder, curious, but he had folded them too quickly, sliding them into an envelope. "Not for you, little one," he'd said gently. She had assumed it was work for his translation job. Now she wasn't sure. "Not for you, not yet." Harrison's voice broke through again. "This is not a decision we present lightly, but it must be presented. Your grandfather's legacy does not end with a medal. It has left a vacancy, one that your record suggests you may be prepared to fill." The words sank like lead. She wasn't sure if the ground was still beneath her. Her vision blurred, the sun too bright, the moment too surreal. A vacancy, a legacy. Was this what the letter had been leading to all along? She wanted to say something, to ask why me, to demand what does this mean, but her voice wouldn't come. She looked down at the case in her hand. It gleamed faintly, catching the light. Bronze and ribbon, recognition and burden. A silence settled that felt heavier than applause, heavier than ceremony. The Admiral stood before her, patient, immovable. Behind her, 1,000 sailors waited, each of them sensing that what was happening on the platform was no longer about recognition. It was about recruitment, about something whispered in shadows, carried through generations, handed now to her whether she wanted it or not. Maya's chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. She heard her grandfather's voice again, a memory so sharp it felt as though he was beside her. "You won't always get to choose when you step forward, Maya, but you'll know when you must." And suddenly she realized she had already stepped forward. The moment Harrison called her name, the moment her shoes struck the concrete, she had crossed a line she could never step back from. Admiral Chin's eyes narrowed, watching her, measuring her silence. And then, softly, so that only she and those closest to the platform could hear, he said, "This is not just about honoring the past, it is about the future, yours." Why weren't they telling her everything? Maya's pulse still thundered in her ears as the two admirals exchanged another look, one so brief and sharp it might have been missed by anyone else. But she caught it. A glance that said measure her. A glance that said test her now. Admiral Harrison adjusted the papers in his hand, then let them fall to his side, his eyes fixed on her. "Seaman recruit," he said quietly, though the microphone carried it across the grounds. "Tell us, why did you join the Navy?" The question hit harder than she expected. 1,000 sailors had joined for reasons they could recite by rote: service, honor, tradition, opportunity. She had rehearsed her answer for interviews, for training evaluations. But now, in front of admirals, in front of her entire command, with the weight of a hidden legacy pressing on her shoulders, the words stuck. She swallowed, her throat dry. "Sir, I wanted to serve. I wanted to prove I could hold my place here." Harrison's gaze didn't waver. "And if your place isn't where you expected it to be?" Her chest tightened. Images flashed in her mind: long nights in the comms shack, her hands raw from equipment checks, the quiet pride of scoring top marks on exams. She had thought her place was technical, steady, predictable. But the way Harrison asked the question told her none of that was certain anymore. She steadied her voice. "Then I'll hold it anyway, sir." For a moment the Admiral's face softened. He gave a single, sharp nod. Admiral Chin stepped forward then, his eyes far sharper, his tone colder. "And if your orders placed you in danger, not of bullets or bombs, but of silence, of being unseen, unacknowledged, forgotten." The words cut deep. Forgotten. That had been the humiliation of the morning, standing invisible while names were called. And yet, hearing it from him, it sounded different, not shameful, but deliberate. A kind of service she hadn't considered. Her jaw tightened. "Sir, if that's the duty, then I'd bear it." Chin's gaze lingered on her for a long moment, too long. She felt stripped bare beneath it. Then he finally stepped back. The formation behind her was utterly silent. The questions hadn't been casual. Everyone knew it. This was more than a medal ceremony. This was something else, an examination in plain sight. Maya felt her heartbeat pounding against the metal case in her hands. She wanted to run. She wanted to disappear. But more than that, she wanted to understand. And then she heard her grandfather's voice again, not in memory this time, but in imagination, sharp as if whispered beside her. "The board is always larger than you can see. Play the piece you don't know is there." She lifted her chin a fraction, held their gaze, said nothing more. Harrison exchanged another brief nod with Chin. Something had passed between them, approval, maybe, or recognition. Then Harrison spoke again, this time his tone formal, heavy with weight. "Seaman recruit Chen, you've been asked why you serve. You've been asked if you will bear what cannot be seen. Your answers have been heard. And now—" He turned to a staff officer, who stepped forward carrying a sealed folder. The officer held it like it was fragile, like it carried more weight than the thick binders of orders Maya had seen passed around her unit before deployments. Harrison took the folder, then looked back at her. "Now comes a choice." The words seemed to split the air. Maya's grip on the metal case tightened until her fingers ached. Chin's voice cut in, low, deliberate. "Your grandfather's service left more than stories and sealed files. It left protocols, directives, promises made to him that, should any of his descendants choose to serve, they would be given the same chance he was offered, to stand in shadows, to shape outcomes before battles begin." The silence that followed was suffocating. Harrison lifted the folder, holding it out toward her. "Inside are orders, advancement, transfer, training. A path that mirrors your grandfather, though shaped for this generation. Accept it and your career will change today. Decline and you return to your current duty. Either way, you walk away carrying your grandfather's honor." The weight of the moment pressed down on her. She could feel her pulse in her throat, in her wrists, in her temples. She had wanted answers, but this wasn't clarity, it was another storm. Her eyes flicked toward the formation. She found Rodriguez among the ranks, his face pale, his eyes wide. He didn't know details, but his nod, small, firm, told her he understood enough. She looked back at the Admirals, the folder, the medal, the weight of a name she hadn't known she carried. Her breath caught, her chest rising sharply. And then Chin leaned in close, his voice dropping low, meant only for her. Your grandfather once wrote that each generation must choose whether to stand where no one else can. He made his choice. Now it's yours. The folder hovered between them. Her hand twitched. And the entire ceremony, 1,000 sailors, officers, commanders held its breath, waiting to see if she would take it. Why couldn't she move? The folder hung there, inches from her hand, held steady by Admiral Harrison as though it weighed nothing at all. But to Maya, it looked heavier than the ships anchored in the harbor behind them. Every instinct told her to reach for it, to take what was being offered, to honor the man whose medal she already held against her chest. But another part of her, quieter, stubborn, whispered no. Her shipmates. She thought of Rodriguez beside her in formation, of the nights they had studied together in the dim light of the barracks. She thought of the petty officers who had drilled her until her voice cracked, who had pulled her through when exhaustion dragged her down. She thought of mornings spent scrubbing decks, of laughter stolen in the mess hall, of the silent pride of belonging. Would she be leaving them behind? Her jaw tightened. She could feel the weight of 1,000 eyes boring into her back. She didn't want them to see hesitation, didn't want them to think she was afraid. But she was. Her grandfather's voice echoed again in her mind. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is wait one more heartbeat before you move. She breathed in sharp, shaky. The air smelled of salt and sun-warmed concrete. She blinked against the brightness of the day, against the way it seemed to spotlight her indecision. Admiral Chin stepped closer, his voice pitched low for her ears alone. This is not abandonment. Transfer orders are routine. Your shipmates will know nothing beyond advancement, but you, his eyes narrowed, you will know what it means to carry silence. Silence forgotten, unseen. She thought of this morning, her name missing from the roll call, the whispers, the humiliation that had burned across her cheeks. How unbearable it had felt to be invisible. And now they were telling her that invisibility wasn't a mistake, it was the point. Her pulse raced. She could almost feel the ground tilting beneath her. She looked again at Rodriguez, his eyes locked on hers. He gave her the smallest of nods, steady, almost defiant. A nod that said, "We'll be proud of you, no matter what." Her throat tightened. She remembered the first week of training when she had nearly collapsed on the run, when Rodriguez had grabbed her arm and hissed, "Not today, Chen. You don't fall today." She had pushed through because of him, because of all of them. And now, she was being asked to leave them behind for something she didn't even understand. Her eyes flicked down to the metal case in her hand. Bronze, blue, her grandfather's name engraved in a record that had lived in shadows for decades. He lived with silence so you wouldn't have to carry questions forever, she told herself. But now the silence is yours. Her grip loosened on the metal, just slightly. She exhaled, long and shaky. The crowd was still silent, waiting. Even the gulls circling above seemed to pause, their cries distant against the hum of the harbor. She straightened her shoulders. Her hand rose slowly, as if pushing through water. Every inch felt like defiance, like surrender, like both. She hesitated again, her fingers hovering just short of the folder. Admiral Harrison didn't move. His arm was steady, patient, as though he had held this folder for generations and could wait one heartbeat more. Admiral Chin's eyes narrowed further, reading her hesitation, calculating it. Her grandfather's voice again, soft, insistent. "The board is always larger than you can see. Play the piece you don't know is there." Her hand closed the final distance. Her fingertips brushed the folder. And the weight of every choice, every silence, every whisper of legacy landed in her palm. What could be inside that folder? Maya's fingertips brushed the edge, then closed around it, her hand trembling in the sunlight. Admiral Harrison released his grip slowly, deliberately, as though passing something more than paper, as though the folder itself carried a legacy heavier than steel. For a moment Maya just held it, staring at the seal stamped across the cover. The eagle, the anchor, the words United States Navy. She had seen them 100 times before on official documents, but here it looked different. Final. Irrevocable. She could feel the eyes of the formation drilling into her back. 1,000 sailors watching, none of them breathing, waiting, wondering. Admiral Harrison didn't let the silence linger. He turned slightly toward the microphone, his voice deep, controlled, resonant. Contained in that folder are orders. Immediate advancement to Petty Officer 3rd Class. Assignment to the Defense Language Institute, Monterey, California, for intensive Mandarin Chinese training. Upon successful completion, transfer to Pacific Fleet Intelligence. A ripple moved through the crowd, not whispers this time, but a collective intake of breath. Maya's knees nearly buckled. Advancement, training, intelligence. The words echoed in her skull, one after another, each louder than the last. 8 months in the Navy. 8 months since she had stood in line with her peers, uniform still stiff with newness, wondering if she belonged. And now this. She clutched the folder tighter, her knuckles white. Admiral Chin stepped forward, his voice quieter but sharper, cutting into her like a blade. This path mirrors your grandfather, but you will walk it with tools he never had, opportunities he could only imagine. You will carry his code name forward. Legacy 9 becomes Legacy 10. Her chest constricted. Legacy. The word no longer felt abstract, it felt binding. She thought of her grandfather again, of the way he had always carried himself with quiet dignity, of how he had never boasted, never sought recognition, how he had worked long nights at a desk, speaking little, his silence stretching across years. She had thought it was the silence of old age. Now she knew it was the silence of secrets. And here she was, asked to inherit them. The crowd behind her was frozen. She could sense their disbelief, their shock. A seaman recruit called forward by admirals advanced instantly, handed orders usually reserved for those already proven in years of service. Maya forced her eyes forward, refusing to turn back, refusing to see the mixture of pride, confusion, envy, or betrayal that might be written on their faces. She focused only on the admirals, on the weight of the folder in her hand, on the metal case pressed against her chest. "Sir," her voice cracked, raw, barely audible. She swallowed hard, steadied it. "What about my division, my shipmates?" Admiral Harrison gave the faintest of smiles, not unkind but heavy with meaning. "They will know you advanced. They will know you earned specialized training. Beyond that, nothing. Classified paths are built on silence." Rodriguez's face flashed in her mind again, his encouragement during drills, his whispered question during formation. "Why haven't they called you yet?" She thought of the nod he had given her moments ago, urging her to step forward. Would he ever know what this moment had cost? Would he ever know why she had left? Her throat tightened. Admiral Chin stepped closer still, his voice pitched for her alone. "This is not about leaving them behind. It is about standing where they cannot, about bearing a weight they never will have to. That is the gift and the burden of intelligence." Gift, burden. The words tangled in her chest. She looked down at the folder again. The seal gleamed under the California sun. She could open it now, read the orders aloud, let every sailor hear what had been decided for her. Or she could keep it closed, hold the weight privately, as her grandfather once had. Her fingers hovered at the flap. The silence stretched. Even the admirals seemed to wait, as if testing not just her decision, but her composure. She inhaled slowly, deeply, the salt air sharp in her lungs. She thought of her grandfather's last days, frail but steady, his eyes always watchful even when his voice had faded. She remembered how he had told her once, "The quietest moments often matter most." Pay attention to them. This was one of those moments. She snapped the seal open. The sound cracked across the platform like thunder. Her eyes scanned the first page. Advancement, promotion, orders, signatures she recognized only from training manuals. Admirals, intelligence directors, names she had never imagined would be tied to her. Her breath caught. It was real, all of it. She closed the folder again, her hands trembling, and looked up at the two men who had placed this path before her. Her voice was steadier now, though her chest still burned with the weight of it. "I accept, sir." The words left her lips before she even realized she had spoken them. The formation erupted. Applause thundered, rolling like surf against the shore. Master Chief Williams barked the command, and the entire formation snapped to salute, the sound of 1,000 hands rising in perfect unison echoing across the grounds. Maya's eyes stung. She returned the salute, holding it steady, her shoulders square. But inside she knew. This wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of something she couldn't yet see, couldn't yet understand, but felt in her bones. Legacy 9 had ended. Legacy 10 had just begun. What happens after applause fades? Maya lowered her salute as the roar of the formation rolled over her. The sound was thunderous, but it felt far away, muffled, as if she were hearing it through water. The metal case was still pressed against her chest, the folder gripped tight in her other hand. Bronze and ribbon, paper and orders, past and future. Admiral Harrison gave a final nod, stepping back toward the microphone. His words were formal again, ceremonial, his tone crafted for the hundreds of sailors who needed closure. "Ladies and gentlemen, today we recognize not only service but sacrifice. Seaman Recruit Chen has accepted advancement, and with it, the continuation of a legacy once hidden. May this remind us all that honor takes many forms, some seen, some unseen." The applause swelled again, uniform and controlled, but the undertone was clear. Awe, shock, curiosity, and maybe even envy. Maya didn't let her eyes drift to the ranks. She couldn't. She knew what she would see: pride in some, confusion in others, and questions that would never be answered, not by her. Because answers were the first thing she was giving up. Master Chief Williams stepped forward, calling the formation back to order, his voice sharp as a blade. The ceremony moved on, names called, awards given, applause rising and falling. But none of it touched Maya anymore. She stood apart now, marked. Her pulse slowed as reality sank in. The folder in her hand was no longer just paper. It was separation, from her peers, from the life she had thought she was building, from the visible path. Rodriguez's face flickered in her mind again. She wanted to tell him everything, that she hadn't abandoned him, that she hadn't chosen ambition over loyalty, that this wasn't about her at all, but about something set in motion long before either of them put on a uniform. But she knew she couldn't. He would see her advancement orders. He would see her departure, and he would never know the truth. That was the cost. The medal, the folder, the silence. The rest of the ceremony blurred. By the time the command to dismiss came, the sun was high, burning away every trace of morning fog. Sailors marched off in orderly lines, conversations buzzing with speculation. But none of them came near her. She was untouchable now, not by rank but by mystery. Admiral Chin lingered near the platform, speaking quietly to Harrison before turning to her one last time. His voice was measured, almost gentle. "Your grandfather carried silence for 35 years. Can you?" Maya's throat tightened. She forced herself to nod. "Yes, sir." His eyes studied hers, searching for doubt. Then finally he gave a single approving nod. "Legacy 10, he said softly, almost like a benediction. "The work continues." He turned and walked away, his figure shrinking against the bright sun. Harrison followed, their aides in step behind them, the sedan waiting at the edge of the field. Within minutes they were gone. And Maya was left standing alone. The metal case felt warm in her hand now, the folder heavier than ever. She drew in a breath, steadying herself, her eyes on the horizon where the ocean stretched endless and blue. Ships lay moored, steel giants that would soon depart, their crews bound for visible missions. Missions that earned ribbons and stories. Missions sung in histories and remembered in reunions. Hers would be different. She thought again of her grandfather, of his quiet smile, of the way he had carried himself with a dignity that needed no recognition. She remembered the day he taught her chess, when he leaned close and said, "The queen is powerful, but sometimes the pawn changes the game." She hadn't understood then, she understood now. Sometimes the strongest move wasn't loud. Sometimes it wasn't visible at all. Sometimes it was silence. Her orders were clear. Monterey first, then Pacific Fleet Intelligence. A path walked in shadows, a legacy not of medals but of secrets. The formation grounds were nearly empty now. The last sailors drifted away, their footsteps fading into distance. Maya stood alone under the California sun, a medal in one hand, orders in the other, and the weight of generations pressing on her shoulders. She exhaled slowly, deeply, letting the air fill her lungs. She wasn't the same recruit who had stood invisible in the fourth row that morning, waiting for her name to be called. She was something else now, something her grandfather had prepared her for without her ever knowing. The silence felt different now, not humiliation, not oversight. Purpose. She turned toward the horizon, her eyes narrowing against the glare. The sun was bright, but beyond it, she knew, were shadows waiting. Shadows she had just chosen to walk into. Her grandfather's code name echoed in her memory, Legacy 9. And now hers, Legacy 10. The work continued. She lifted her chin, squared her shoulders, and stepped forward. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.